The distant future was filled with wonder and terror. Civilizations rose and fell, but one thing remained constant in the universe: the power of the alien races. Among them was Queen Zorana, a being of incredible strength and wisdom. She ruled with an iron fist, commanding the respect of countless species. Her word was law. Her kingdom stretched across several star systems, and her people adored her as a goddess. To her, strength and power were the ultimate measures of a being's worth. But the time had come for her to make an alliance, a political marriage, a union between Earth and the vast alien empire meant to seal the peace and secure the future of both races. The negotiations had been long, and the human representatives, while persistent, were mostly seen as unworthy of such an important alliance. After all, humanity was new to the galactic stage, and their ways were primitive compared to the ancient alien civilizations. The humans were young, but Zorana's advisors assured her that this marriage would be beneficial. At the center of the agreement was Captain Ethan Wren, a human soldier who had earned his place among the Earth diplomats. His bravery and leadership were well known among his people, though he was hardly the most decorated or renowned warrior. He was strong, but in the world of the galaxy's greatest minds and warriors, he was just one man, a symbol. And that's all Zorana needed, a symbol of peace, not a partner in strength. The ceremony was a grand event. Zorana stood tall at the altar of the great hall in her royal palace, her eyes cold and calculating. The air was filled with an intoxicating mix of perfumes, alien songs, and the hum of distant starships. The entire galaxy had eyes on her, watching. This moment that would determine the future of Earth and her empire. The crowd hushed as the doors opened, revealing Ethan. He wasn't what Zorana expected. The human man stood before her, dressed in ceremonial robes. His face, while handsome, lacked the majestic sharpness of the alien leaders in her court. His build was strong, but not exaggerated. His dark brown eyes met hers, unflinching. But there was something in his gaze she couldn't quite place. There was no fear, no sense of inferiority, just quiet resolve. Zorana's mind dismissed the thought quickly. He's just another pawn in this game, she told herself. He was human, after all. She had faced warriors far greater than him, and yet there was something about his presence that felt different. Perhaps it was the way he moved, graceful, as though his every step had purpose. The marriage vows were recited. Zorana, with the calm authority of a queen, said her words without hesitation. I take you, Ethan Wren, as my mate, for the peace of our people, for the stability of our worlds. Her voice rang through the hall, commanding respect from all who heard it. Ethan replied in kind, his voice steady. I take you, Zorana, as my queen, for the peace of our worlds and for the future of humanity. The crowd erupted into applause, but for Zorana, the words felt empty. She had no connection to the man standing before her. He was a human, an outsider in her world of power and grandeur. She saw the union as nothing more than a political transaction, a necessary step in her reign. The celebration that followed was full of feasts, dances, and toasts. Zorana stood at the center, her eyes scanning the guests. Most were dignitaries from various star systems, all there to witness the joining of Earth and her empire. She saw the nervous smiles of humans trying to fit into a world they didn't fully understand, their attempts at diplomacy almost comical. But the alien guests, the ones she truly respected, kept their distance, their faces a mix of curiosity and disdain. Ethan, for his part, kept to himself. He seemed content to simply observe. He had no grand speech to make, no extravagant promises to offer. He knew his place, or so it seemed. Zorana couldn't help but watch him out of the corner of her eye. He moved through the crowd with ease, talking to various diplomats and somehow making them feel comfortable. His smile, simple but genuine, seemed to put them at ease. Zorana raised an eyebrow. Was this how humans were? So effortlessly charming. She couldn't decide if she liked it or if it annoyed her. The night wore on, and soon the guests began to retire to their quarters. Zorana, ever the ruler, made her way to the royal chambers, where she would sleep alone. The marriage was symbolic, but it was still expected that they would share a bed. She had done her duty, and Ethan was, in her eyes, nothing more than a figurehead. As she sat in her chambers, Zorana's mind kept drifting back to Ethan. Why did he look so different? She had dealt with countless humans in her time. Some were brave, some were cunning, but none had ever made her feel this unsettled. It wasn't fear. It was something more difficult to define. Curiosity, maybe. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone in his own quarters. His mind, too, was occupied with thoughts of Zorana. She was beautiful, yes, but there was more to her than her appearance. He had met many leaders in his lifetime, but none had the cold strength that radiated from her. He respected her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she saw him as little more than a pawn. But Ethan was no ordinary man. Beneath the surface of the soldier who stood before her, there was more, much more, that Zorana would soon learn to respect. He stood from his chair, looking out into the stars. He had a mission, a purpose, and it was far greater than any alliance. He wasn't just here to be a symbol. He was here to protect humanity. He had his orders, and he would see them through. But there was also a part of him that, despite the coldness of the queen, hoped that he might prove himself worthy of her respect, if not as a husband, then as something more. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Zorana would soon realize that Ethan Wren was not just a common human. Days passed after the grand wedding, but Queen Zorana's thoughts never truly left the strange human at her side. Ethan Wren was still nothing more than a figurehead in her mind, a necessary part of a larger political scheme. But as time went on, she began to notice things, small things, that made her question whether she had misjudged him. It started with the guards. The palace was filled with elite warriors, each one trained in combat techniques passed down through generations. They were a proud and formidable force, the best of their kind. And yet, when Ethan joined them in the training halls, he never seemed to break a sweat. At first, it was only a passing observation. After all, Ethan was a soldier, and soldiers were strong. But as the days went on, Zorana couldn't ignore the strange ease with which he moved, his strength seeming to match or exceed that of even the most seasoned warriors. One afternoon, Zorana entered the training hall to speak with one of her commanders, only to stop in her tracks as she saw Ethan. He was in the middle of a sparring match with two of her top guards. It wasn't supposed to be a match. It was a training exercise meant to test his skills, but Ethan had taken the lead with such casual ease that the two guards were struggling to keep up. The queen's eyes narrowed as she watched Ethan effortlessly disarm one of the guards, throwing him to the ground with a swift, controlled move. The second guard attempted to strike him, but Ethan sidestepped the blow, using only his hand to redirect the guard's arm, sending him crashing into a nearby pillar. It was like watching a predator toy with its prey. "Enough!" Zorana commanded, her voice cold and sharp. The guards stood up, clearly embarrassed but trying to maintain their composure. Ethan, however, was unbothered. He gave a slight nod of acknowledgement to Zorana and then backed away, his face calm and composed, as if nothing unusual had just happened. Zorana crossed the room slowly, her eyes locked on him. "That was unnecessary," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. Ethan simply shrugged, his face still impassive. "I didn't mean to embarrass them." They're good warriors, but they weren't prepared for my style. His tone was humble, but something in his words made Zorana pause. It wasn't arrogance. No, it was something else. Something that made her feel uneasy. For the next few days, Zorana couldn't help but observe Ethan more closely. She noticed the way his body seemed to move effortlessly through the halls of the palace. His posture always perfect, his gaze calm and focused. It was as though he was always aware of his surroundings, always prepared for anything. There was more to this man than what she had initially seen. And the more she observed, the more questions filled her mind. Why was he so different from the others? Why did he seem so capable? One evening, Zorana decided to test him. She arranged for a simple diplomatic dinner to take place, inviting several leaders from surrounding star systems. The dinner was a casual affair, but Zorana knew it would provide an opportunity to see how Ethan handled the pressure of an important event. She had seen him in physical confrontations, but what about his social skills? Could he fit into the grand court of the galaxy's elite? As the evening went on, Zorana watched Ethan closely. He seemed at ease among the various dignitaries. He spoke with confidence, but not arrogance, and his words were always measured, thoughtful. He never tried to dominate the conversation, but his presence was felt, quietly commanding respect. At one point, a leader from the nearby Zarathi Empire, a tall, imposing alien with scales and sharp teeth, spoke up. His voice was loud and demanding, meant to draw attention to himself, but Ethan handled him with grace. The Zarathi leader, Korgan, made a pointed comment about the human's place in the galactic world, his words dripping with condescension. "Tell me, human," Korgan said, his sharp gaze focusing on Ethan. "How does it feel to be married to a queen? I wonder how much your kind truly understands what it means to rule." Ethan didn't flinch. He simply met Korgan's eyes with a calm expression. "I may not know what it's like to rule an empire," he replied, his voice steady. "But I know what it's like to serve one, and that's enough for me." The room fell silent for a moment. Korgan's eyes narrowed and the tension in the air thickened. Zorana could sense that this conversation was about to escalate. But Ethan didn't back down. He remained composed, unwavering, and somehow he made Korgan look small. Korgan huffed, clearly frustrated by Ethan's response, and changed the subject, but Zorana's mind was racing. She had seen many leaders before, but none of them had managed to deflect an insult from Korgan so effortlessly. There was something in Ethan's demeanor, something that seemed to cut through the political games with the precision of a blade. Later, that night, as the dinner concluded and the guests began to depart, Zorana found herself walking beside Ethan. The two of them had barely exchanged more than a few words since the ceremony, but tonight there was a quiet tension between them. "You handled that well," Zorana said quietly, her voice carrying a hint of something she hadn't expected. Admiration. Not many have the courage to speak so openly to Korgan. Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "He wasn't really my target," he replied simply. "The real question is whether anyone in that room was paying attention. Leaders are like that, always trying to prove themselves." Zorana's brow furrowed. "And you think you're the one who has it figured out?" Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time, Zorana saw something flicker in his eyes, a glimpse of something deeper. "I've had my share of struggles," he said softly. "But the truth is, I've never been afraid to speak my mind. Maybe that's what makes me different." Zorana turned her gaze forward, her thoughts churning. She had expected nothing more than a figurehead by her side, but with every interaction, Ethan proved to be something far more complex. It wasn't just his physical strength or his quiet confidence. It was his mind, his ability to see things others missed, to read situations with uncanny precision, and it was starting to bother her. The following day, as Zorana reviewed some matters of state with her advisors, she found herself distracted, unable to focus on the reports in front of her. She couldn't shake the thought of Ethan, his quiet strength, his ability to move in and out of situations with such ease. But there was one thing she couldn't deny. He was changing the way she saw the human race. Perhaps they weren't as weak as she had assumed, and perhaps, just perhaps, the man she had married was not the man she had thought him to be. The days following the diplomatic dinner were filled with tension. Queen Zorana's mind was constantly occupied by thoughts of Ethan. There was something about him that she couldn't shake, a quiet power that seemed to linger beneath the surface, just waiting to reveal itself. His ability to handle tense situations, his strength in the training halls, and his remarkable calmness in the face of danger all pointed to something far beyond the ordinary. Zorana had been around powerful beings all her life, but there was something different about Ethan. It wasn't just his human origins that confused her. It was his calm, his ability to move through the world with such purpose, such precision, that made her question everything she had believed. One evening, after a long day of court meetings, Zorana found herself in her private chambers. The palace was quiet, the stars twinkling outside her window, but her mind was far from peaceful. She paced the room, her hands clasped behind her back. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She needed answers. She summoned Ethan to her chambers, the summons brief but clear. Within minutes, the door opened, and there he stood, calm, composed, but with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Ethan had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but tonight, Zorana could see that he was ready for something more than the usual pleasantries. "Come in," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. Ethan stepped into the room, the door closing softly behind him. He remained standing a few paces away, waiting for her to speak. Zorana took a deep breath. "Ethan," she began, her voice more serious than usual, "I need to ask you something." He nodded, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable. "Go ahead, my queen." Zorana took a step forward, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "There's something strange about you. Something I can't explain. Your abilities, they don't match up with the normal human standards." She paused, her gaze never leaving his face. "Tell me the truth. Who are you really?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of Zorana's uncertainty. Ethan stood still, but Zorana could feel his internal struggle. The calmness that always surrounded him was gone, replaced by something more vulnerable. Ethan exhaled slowly, his eyes dropping to the floor for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm not just a regular human soldier. There's more to me than what I've let on." Zorana's heart skipped a beat. The words she had been expecting were finally being spoken, but they felt even more confusing than she imagined. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quieter now, curiosity and suspicion swirling within her. Ethan stepped closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "I was part of a special program, one that went beyond normal military training. Earth's scientists, in collaboration with alien races, experimented on me. They mixed human DNA with that of other species, creating someone who was stronger, faster, and more intelligent than anyone had the right to be." Zorana's eyes widened. This was far more than she had anticipated. A genetically enhanced human. It explained the strange power she had seen in him, but it also raised even more questions. Why had he kept this secret? What else was he hiding? "I was created for a purpose," Ethan continued, his voice distant as though recalling painful memories. "I was meant to protect humanity, to ensure that no one, human or alien, would ever threaten us. But I wasn't supposed to exist outside of that role. I was an experiment, a tool, nothing more." He looked up at her, his gaze intense. I'm not just a soldier. I'm something else. Something more. Zorana felt a mixture of shock and awe. She had never encountered a being like him. His strength was one thing, but his past, the burden of his creation, was something else entirely. She had always thought that strength was earned, not manufactured. But Ethan, in his own way, had earned his power through something far more complicated than any alien warrior could understand. "And now you've come here," Zorana said, her voice softening as she considered the weight of his words. "Why? Why marry me? Why expose yourself like this?" Ethan paused, his eyes searching hers for a moment before he answered. "Because I was ordered to," he said simply. "But also because I needed to protect more than just humanity. When I saw you, when I learned of your kingdom, I realized that my mission was not just about Earth. It was about protecting all life, regardless of race, and ensuring that we all had a future." Zorana's mind raced. She had known he was more than just a symbol of peace. But this was something she hadn't anticipated. She had thought she was marrying a human to maintain peace between their worlds. Instead, she had unknowingly married a warrior, a protector, a creation meant to safeguard the future of both humans and aliens. "But why tell me now?" Zorana asked, her voice betraying a mixture of confusion and a strange sense of relief. "Why not sooner?" Ethan's face was soft, almost regretful. "Because I didn't want you to see me as a weapon. I wanted you to see me as a partner, as someone who could stand by your side not because of what I was made to be, but because of who I am." Zorana stood still, processing his words. She had always seen herself as a ruler, a queen who commanded respect, but she had never had to confront something like this before. She had never had to deal with the reality of someone's true identity being so different from what they appeared to be. "I see," she finally said, her voice low, almost thoughtful. "But what does this mean for us, for our marriage?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "It means that I am here for you, not just as your husband, but as your ally. I have no hidden agenda. My loyalty is to you, to your people, and to the future of our worlds. I may have been created for a purpose, but now I choose my own path." Zorana felt a strange sense of calm wash over her as she processed his words. She had never known a human to be so resolute, so determined. Ethan was not just a figurehead in her court. He was someone who could stand beside her, not as a pawn, but as an equal. She had always believed that strength came from one's ability to rule, but now she was beginning to see that strength could come from something far more complicated. She met his gaze, her expression serious but no longer distant. "We will need to talk more about this," she said, her tone resolute. "There is much to learn, but for now, you have my trust. I won't turn away from you. Not yet." Ethan gave a small nod, a quiet understanding between them. "Thank you, my queen," he said softly. Zorana stepped closer, her thoughts still churning. But something within her had shifted. She had married a human, but now she realized that Ethan Wren was no ordinary human. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would become the ally she needed to face the challenges ahead. As the silence stretched between them, Zorana couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Her marriage to Ethan would change everything. The days following the revelation of Ethan's true nature were filled with tension. Queen Zorana had learned that her new husband was not the simple human soldier she had thought him to be. He was something far greater, a genetically enhanced warrior with the strength, intelligence, and abilities of many different species. It was a truth that had shaken her, but one that she could not deny. Still, there was no time for uncertainty. Zorana's reign was under constant threat from within. her own court. While she had been distracted by Ethan's secrets, there were those who saw her marriage as an opportunity to challenge her power. Among them was Lord Corin, an influential and ambitious noble in Zorana's court. He had always been a thorn in her side, using his position to manipulate situations to his advantage. His eyes were now firmly set on the throne, and he knew that the marriage between Zorana and Ethan could be the key to toppling her rule. Corin had never liked the idea of the human joining the royal family, and now that Ethan's true abilities were revealed, he saw a chance to exploit the situation. He believed that the strength Ethan possessed was a threat to his own ambitions and the stability of the Empire. The idea of a human rising to such prominence in the galaxy was intolerable to him, and he would do anything to bring Zorana's reign to an end. One evening, as the moonlight filtered through the palace windows, Corin met with his closest allies. They sat in a secret chamber deep within the palace, away from prying eyes. "We cannot allow this." Corin's voice was low, but filled with intensity. "The human is far too dangerous. If Zorana truly believes she can trust him, she is a fool. He is no more than a weapon, and weapons can be turned against their masters." A tall, slender woman sitting across from him, Lord Corin's most trusted advisor, spoke up. "What do you propose, my lord?" Corin's smile was cold, calculating. "We strike before they grow too strong. Zorana may be powerful, but if we can separate her from this human, we can divide her loyalties. Once we've done that, we will have the upper hand." The others nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. Corin's plan was clear. They would create chaos, undermine the Queen's trust in Ethan, and sow the seeds of doubt within the court. If they could isolate her from her husband, the throne would be theirs for the taking. Meanwhile, Zorana and Ethan were slowly beginning to build a bond of their own. While their marriage had started out as a political necessity, there was no denying the strength that Ethan had brought to their relationship. Zorana had always prided herself on her ability to lead, but now she found herself relying on Ethan in ways she had not expected. The two of them would often walk the palace gardens together in the quiet hours of the evening. It was a time when Zorana could allow herself to be vulnerable, to speak openly, without the weight of her crown pressing on her shoulders. "You know," Zorana said one evening as they strolled through the blooming flowers, "I never imagined my life would turn out like this." Ethan glanced at her, his face soft but serious. "In what way?" Zorana smiled faintly. "I always thought I would rule alone, that the power I had was all I needed." She looked up at the stars, the night sky stretching endlessly above them. "But now, I find myself questioning everything I've ever known. My people, my empire, even my own heart." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. "And what are you questioning exactly?" She met his eyes. "I'm questioning whether I made the right choices. I was so sure of everything before, but now I'm not so certain." Ethan stepped closer, his presence strong but gentle. "You made those choices because you believed in them. It's not wrong to question things, but don't let doubt take away what you've built. You're a queen, Zorana. You have the strength to stand by your decisions, even if they're not always easy." Zorana felt a sense of warmth spread through her chest as his words settled in. She had always thought of herself as a ruler, cold and unfeeling when it came to matters of the throne. But now, Ethan was showing her another side of leadership, a side that was about trust, partnership, and vulnerability. "I didn't expect this," she whispered, almost to herself. Ethan's voice was steady and reassuring. "Neither did I. But sometimes the unexpected is what shapes us." Zorana smiled, feeling a deep connection with him. She hadn't expected to trust him this much, but in the quiet moments they shared, she began to understand that he wasn't just a tool of peace. He was her partner, and that was a strength she had never known. But as their relationship grew stronger, so did the undercurrents of tension within the palace. Lord Corran's schemes had already begun to take shape. His first move was subtle. Small whispers spread among the court about Ethan's mysterious origins and the potential threat his enhanced abilities posed. These rumors were enough to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of some of Zorana's closest advisors. One by one, the whispers grew louder. Some questioned whether it was wise to trust a human, a genetically altered human at that, with the future of the Empire. Others wondered if Zorana was putting herself and her people in danger by aligning with someone whose loyalty was still uncertain. Zorana's trusted general, Zaylor, came to her one evening with troubling news. He was a man who had served her for many years, his loyalty unwavering, but even he seemed troubled. "My queen," Zaylor began, his voice heavy with concern. "There are those in the court who question your decision to marry this human. They speak of his abilities as a threat, and they say that you're losing control of the Empire. I fear that unrest is growing." Zorana sighed, rubbing her temples, as the weight of the situation settled on her shoulders. "I understand, Zaylor. But what do you suggest we do? Should I cast him aside?" Zaylor shook his head. "No, my queen. I do not believe that is the answer. But you must address these concerns. If we do not, the court may grow restless. You have always been a powerful ruler, but even you cannot control the hearts and minds of everyone." Zorana stared out the window, lost in thought. She could feel the walls of her kingdom closing in, the pressure mounting from every side. Ethan had never asked for this. He had come to her as a protector, a partner. But now, he was being used, as a pawn in a game he had no part in. "I will confront the court," Zorana said finally, her voice firm. "I will remind them of my power and my authority, and I will remind them that Ethan and I stand together, no matter what anyone says." Zaylor bowed, his expression grim but respectful. "I will stand by you, my queen." The next day, Zorana called a meeting with her inner council. As she entered the grand hall, the room fell silent. The advisors, dignitaries, and nobles all stood, their eyes on her. Zorana's gaze swept over them, cold and commanding. "Today, I address the rumors that have been spreading through this court," she said, her voice steady. "I have heard the whispers. I know there are those among you who doubt my decision to marry Captain Ethan Wren, and I understand your concerns. But I will tell you this, he is not a threat. He is my ally, my partner, and I trust him." She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was still, but there was a shift in the air, a tension that was palpable. Zorana's eyes narrowed, her gaze landing on Lord Corran. "And anyone who seeks to divide us will have to answer to me." The court was silent for a moment, longer. But then Lord Corran stood, his face calm, but his eyes filled with defiance. "We question your decisions, my queen, because we are loyal to you. But we fear that this union will lead to the downfall of everything you have built. We cannot allow a human to wield such power." Zorana's eyes flashed with anger, but she kept her composure. "Then you will not allow it. I am the queen here, and my decisions stand. I will not be swayed by fear." Ethan stepped forward, his presence steady and calm. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here to help build a future where we all can stand together. And that future doesn't belong to any one race or any one person. It belongs to all of us." Zorana felt a surge of pride. Ethan had spoken the truth, one she had come to believe herself. The court was quiet, but for the first time in a long time, Zorana felt the weight of her crown lessening. She had made her choice, and she would stand by it, no matter the cost. The tension in the palace had reached a boiling point. Queen Zorana's marriage to Ethan Wren, the genetically enhanced human, had become the focus of growing unrest within her court. There were whispers in every corner, doubts about the future of the Empire, and questions about Ethan's true loyalty. But now, Zorana knew that there was no turning back. Her alliance with Ethan had been tested, and together they had stood firm. But the true test was coming. Lord Koran, with his ambition and cunning, had made his move. His alliance with key factions in the court had begun to unravel Zorana's support. The nobles who once stood by her side now questioned her every decision, and there was an air of rebellion creeping into the palace halls. They believed that the queen was losing control, that the strength of her leadership was being compromised by a human she had chosen to stand beside her. The final blow came when an assassination attempt was made on Zorana's life. It had happened during a formal gathering, a diplomatic event where the future of the galaxy was supposed to be discussed. A group of nobles, led by Koran's conspirators, had planned to take advantage of the occasion. They knew that if they eliminated the queen, chaos would reign, and they would have the opportunity to seize power. The attempt was swift. A well-placed, poisoned dart aimed at Zorana's heart, fired from the shadows. No one saw the assassin until it was too late. But as the dart sped toward its target, Ethan was there. He moved like lightning, his enhanced reflexes kicking in. With a single, graceful motion, he deflected the dart mid-flight with a metal plate he grabbed from the table beside him. The dart spun wildly through the air, missing Zorana by mere inches. Before anyone could react, Ethan had already moved, closing the distance between the would-be assassin and the queen. His hand shot out, grabbing the man by the throat and lifting him off the ground. There was no fear in Ethan's eyes, just the cold, calculated precision of someone who had been trained for this very moment. "Who sent you?" Ethan's voice was low, but it carried an undeniable weight. The assassin struggled in his grip, but Ethan's strength was too much. He squeezed harder, his hand tightening around the man's throat. Zorana, still in shock, rose from her seat, her gaze locked on Ethan. She had seen many battles, many deaths, but this was different. This was a man who had just saved her life, a man she had once thought of as nothing more than a symbol, now standing before her as her protector. The assassin's eyes darted to Koran, who was standing across the room. For a moment, their eyes met, two players in a deadly game. But before the assassin could say a word, Ethan slammed him to the ground, knocking him unconscious with a swift strike to the back of the head. Zorana's heart pounded in her chest. As the chaos of the moment settled around her, the room was in disarray. Guests were scrambling, some in fear, others in disbelief. But Ethan stood tall, his presence commanding. His hand remained on the assassin's throat, making it clear that no one would escape the consequences of this act. "Gather the council," Zorana said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We are done with this nonsense." As the guards hauled the assassin away, Zorana turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and a deep, growing understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's my duty, my queen, but this won't end with just one assassin. There are more, and they will come." The confrontation with the assassin was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Zorana and Ethan prepared for the storm that was about to hit. The conspirators within the court had revealed themselves, and their plot to overthrow the queen was no longer hidden. It was clear that Lord Koran, along with his allies, would stop at nothing to see Zorana's reign end. Zorana called for an emergency meeting of her closest allies, including General Zaylor and a handful of loyal nobles. They gathered in the War Room, a large chamber deep within the palace that had seen countless plans and strategies unfold. "We cannot waste any more time," Zorana said, her voice cold and commanding as she looked around the room. "Koran will strike again. He's already proven that he's willing to go to any lengths to see me fall, and we can't afford to wait for the next assassination attempt." Ethan stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room as he listened to the murmurs of the council. His mind was already working, calculating the next steps, but he knew that Zorana would have to make the final call. "You're right," General Zalor agreed, his voice low. "We've seen the signs of rebellion in the court. They think that if they can weaken you, they can break your will. But they are wrong. If we strike now, we can catch them off guard." Zorana nodded, her eyes hardening. "We'll take the fight to them. We need to expose Koran and his followers for what they are, traitors. But we'll do it in a way that no one can deny. If we do this right, we'll have the support of the court, and we'll eliminate any doubts about my rule." Ethan's gaze met hers, a silent understanding passing between them. This was no longer just about saving the Queen. It was about protecting everything they had built together. The galaxy, the Empire, and the future they both wanted. "We'll need to act quickly," Ethan said, his voice steady. "The longer we wait, the more power Koran gains. He'll use the time to rally his supporters. We need to take out his key allies first, before they can unite against us." Zorana turned to Zalor, her face set with determination. "Prepare the forces. We're going to make our move tonight." That evening, Zorana, Ethan, and their loyal forces moved quickly through the palace. Their target was Koran's inner circle, a group of nobles and advisors who had been aiding his conspiracy. The plan was simple: take them by surprise and eliminate them swiftly before they could regroup or retaliate. Ethan led a group of soldiers, his presence commanding as they swept through the palace's hidden passages, catching Koran's supporters off guard. There were moments of chaos, quick clashes between the guards and rebels, but Ethan's enhanced abilities made him an unstoppable force. He was everywhere, his movements swift and precise, ensuring that no one escaped. Zorana, meanwhile, made her way to the council chamber where Koran was expected to be. She knew that this was the moment that would define her reign. If she failed now, everything would be lost. The chamber doors opened with a heavy creak, and Zorana entered, her gaze fixed on the man who had once been a trusted advisor, now a traitor. Koran stood at the far end of the room, his back to her, speaking with a group of his remaining allies. "Lord Koran!" Zorana's voice rang out, commanding attention. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Koran's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "Ah, the Queen. Come to face your fate?" Zorana took a step forward, her eyes cold and unyielding. "No, I've come to end yours." With a swift motion, she signaled to Ethan, who entered behind her, his presence overwhelming. In that moment, it was clear Zorana had reclaimed her power, and she was no longer the Queen who would be manipulated. Koran's allies, seeing that they were outmatched, tried to flee, but Ethan's soldiers quickly overwhelmed them. Koran himself attempted to make a run for it, but Ethan was faster, his hand grabbing the back of Koran's collar and yanking him back. "You were always weak," Ethan said, his voice steady as he held Koran in place. "You never understood what real strength is." Zorana approached, her eyes locking onto Koran's with an icy calm. "You've betrayed me, and now you will pay the price." With a swift motion, Zorana signaled for the guards to take Koran away. He had lost. The rebellion was over. The following days were filled with reports and cleanup. Koran and his conspirators were arrested and brought to justice. Zorana's rule was restored, and her reign solidified. The court was quiet now, no longer filled with whispers of rebellion or doubts about her leadership. As for Ethan, he had proven himself not just as a soldier, but as a true ally, a partner who had helped her protect the Empire. Zorana had once thought she could rule alone, but now she knew that together they could accomplish more than she had ever dreamed. And so Zorana and Ethan stood together, ready to face the challenges of the future, knowing that their bond was unbreakable. The galaxy would know their strength, and no one would ever question their power again.